Hola! This video will teach you how to conjugate irregular verbs. But before we can get started conjugating irregular verbs in the present tense, we have to review how to conjugate regular verbs. So if you remember, when we're conjugating verbs, there are two parts. There's a stem and an ending. There are AR verbs, ER verbs, and IR verbs. For each one of those different types of endings, we have to take those off and add the new endings for each different type of verb. So let's go through a couple of examples to show you what that looks like. If we take a verb like hablar, which is an AR verb, we add our stem HABL through all of the forms. Comer is an ER verb. Again, we start by just writing the stem, COM, in each of those forms. And the same thing for escribir, which is an IR verb. Our stem is escribe. Then we add our endings. So for our AR verb, we add our AR endings. For comer, our ER verb, we add our ER endings. And the same thing for escribir, an IR verb, we add our IR endings. That leaves us with our conjugated verbs. Hablar is conjugated hablo, hablas, habla, hablamos, habláis, hablan. Comer is conjugated como, comes, come, comemos, coméis, and comen. And escribir. Escribo, escribes, escribe, escribimos, escribís, and escriben. Alright, now that we have a handle on conjugating regular verbs, let's look at conjugating irregular verbs. There are three different types of irregular verbs in the present tense. There are stem-changing verbs, yogo verbs, and verbs that are just very irregular. If you notice, within the stem-changing verbs, there are four different types. There's E to IE, E to I, O to UE, and U to UE. You'll see what we mean by that here in a minute. When I'm showing you how to conjugate these irregular verbs, I'm going off the list of irregular verbs that you have in your vocabulary list. It's on the back side of your vocabulary. You will see that you have your stem-changing verbs on the top, the yogo verbs in the middle, and at the bottom, the totally irregular verbs. Alright, let's start with our first type of stem-changing verbs. We have E to IE. Comenzar is the first one on your list of E to IE stem-changing verbs. So how to conjugate this? We follow the same process that we did with the regular verbs. Start by just writing your stem. So for comenzar, our stem is comenz, C-O-M-E-N-Z. And we wrote that through all of those forms, the yo, tú, él, usted, nosotros, vosotros, and ellos, ellas, ustedes. Okay, after we've written our stem, then we add our endings. O, as, a, amos, ais, an. Notice I wrote the AR endings because comenzar is an AR verb. But we're not done yet. This is an irregular verb, so we need to change our stem as it tells us to. The E changes to an IE. So for example, in the yo form, comenzar, that E changes to an IE and it becomes comienzo. Tu form is comienzas, él, ella, usted, comienza. Nosotros, ustedes, comenzamos. Nosotros, vosotros does not change. And the él, ellos, ellas, ustedes form becomes comienzan. So notice that I only changed that stem from E to IE in the shape where it's grayed out. We call that the boot shape. So remember, every time you have a stem-changing verb, it only changes the stem in that boot shape. Let's look at a different stem-changing verb. This one is an E to I stem change. Follow the same process. Okay, for the verb pedir. For this verb, our stem is PED, so we wrote that in each form. Then we add our endings for IR verbs. O, es, e, imos, is, and en. Now again, before we're done, we have to do our stem change. So in that boot shape only, the E becomes an I. So we're left with pido, pides, pide, pedimos, pedis, and piden. Alright, our next type of stem changing verb is O to UE. Poder is one of those types of stem changers. So again, we'll follow the same process. Write our stem, P-O-D, in each of those forms. Add our ER endings, because it's an ER verb, O, es, e, hemos, eis, and en. And then we do the stem change in the boot. That O in our stem becomes a UE, as it tells us to. Puedo, puedes, puede, podemos, podéis, pueden. Our last type of stem changing verb is a U to UE. We only have one verb that fits in this category, and it is jugar. So again, we will follow the same process. Write down our stem, which is J-U-G, add our endings for AR, O, as, a, amos, ais, an, and then we change our stem from U to UE, but only in that boot shape. Remember, every time that we are doing a stem changing verb, we need to change the stem, however it tells us to, but only in that boot shape. Remember, that's just for stem changing verbs, the boot changers. Our next type of verb is yogo verbs. These are called yogos because they're only irregular in the yo form, that first form. And if you notice, they all have a go. Okay? So, when we have our yogo verb, in the yo form, there is a go. That's what we need to remember. So for our verb salir, our yo form is salgo. The rest of the forms conjugate like a regular verb. Sales, sale, salimos, salís, and salen. Let's take a look at another one. Hacer. The yo form is hago. The tu form is haces, hace, hacemos, haceis, hacen. Remember, your yo form is the only one that's irregular and it has a go in it. Another one, poner. The yo form becomes pongo. And we conjugate the rest of them like a regular verb, adding our ER endings. Another one, traer. So it's a little bit different. You have to remember to add that I in the yogo form. So we have traigo, traes, trae, traemos, traes, and traen. There are some on your list that are yogo and stem changing verbs. So let's take a look at each of those. The first one you have is tener. If you see, it is a yogo, so we have tengo in the yo form. But it's also a stem changer. It's an E to IE. So we conjugate in that boot tienes, tiene. The nosotros and vosotros do not stem change, so tenemos, tenéis. And then back in the boot we have tienen. Let's look at another. Venir is also a yogo and stem changing verb. The yo form is vengo. And then we have vienes, viene, venemos, venéis, and vienen. The last one you have that fits into both of these categories is decir. The yo form is digo, then dices, dice, decimos, decís, and dicen. So again, we have that boot shape to accommodate the stem changing verb, but it's also a yogo, so the yo form is different. Alright, your last type of verb are very irregular verbs. They're just called this because we don't have any other rhyme or reason to why they conjugate like this. You just have to memorize how they conjugate. They don't have any rules that hold them together other than they are just very irregular. So the first one is ver. The yo form is veo. Then we have ves, ve, vemos, veis, and ven. Pay attention to the vosotros. There's no accent. The next one is ser. You guys have already learned this verb, so hopefully this looks familiar to you. Soy, eres, es. Somos, sois, son. Estar is your next one. The yo form is estoy, estás, está, estamos, estáis, and están. Again, pay attention to where those accents are. Ir. The yo form is voy, and then we have vas, va, vamos, vais, van. Your next one is dar. Doy, das, da, damos, dais, dan. And your last one in this category is saber. The yo form is se, with an accent, and then the rest of them conjugate like normal. Sabes, sabe, sabemos, sabes, saben. Alright, and that wraps us up for our irregular verbs in the present tense.